Go.
So welcome everybody to another edition of Truth to Power here on Forward Radio. We're your community radio station broadcasting out of the top of the Hayburn building at 106.5 FM. We also live stream to the world at forwardradio.org, and we want you to go there to become a part of this community radio station. It's radio for the people, by the people. We're not controlled by corporate interests. You don't hear advertising on this station. And it's just people-powered radio, and that means we need you, the people, to get involved. So go to forwardradio.org. If you click on participate, you could pitch us an idea for a show. It could be a new weekly program like this, or a one-time access hour. You don't need to know anything about radio or the technology. We'll help you out with all of that. Get your voices on the air, whatever issues you're passionate about. Or you could be a guest on a program like this. And we also rely entirely on your listener contributions to keep us on the air. Thanks to everybody who chipped in during Give for Good Louisville back on mid-September. What a great day of fundraising that was. We raised over $4,000 beyond our goal for the station. That's keeping us on the air for 200 days or more. So that's great. And we need those funds to keep coming in. So if you missed out on Give for Good Louisville, you can go to forwardradio.org now, click on donate, and give us a one-time gift, or maybe you become a sustainer, maybe $5 a month or something like that. You could really help the station out and become a part of it today at forwardradio.org. Well, my name is Justin Mogg. Joining me in the virtual studio today is Hart Hagan. Welcome, Hart.
Hi, Justin. How are you today?
I'm good. It's nice to see you, man. We are here for another book club of the air, an intimate one with just Hart and I. We always open this up to other Forward Radio programmers and community members are welcome to join us. The book we're going to talk about today, we're going to revisit the title because it's the 10th anniversary already, which is what really blows me away. I can't believe time has flown by so fast, of a wonderful book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. If you haven't had a chance to read this text, well, the 10th anniversary might be a fantastic excuse to do so, because I think it really helps contextualize a lot of the issues that are tearing our society apart right now. It doesn't go into pandemics, but it goes into a pandemic of racism that's really plagued our nation since its founding, and shows how that racism is sort of baked into the nation. I'm always hopeful and think that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be baked out of the system, but it's right. It definitely needs to be pulled out by the roots. That's what this work, I think, shows us, that we can't just sort of prune around racism, right? We've really got to rip it out by the roots, because we've heard these ideas about a school to prison pipeline, about modern day slavery, as Michelle Alexander calls it. It's the new Jim Crow of our era, right? And it's hard to really get a grasp on what that means. I mean, the right will, of course, say, well, it's because people deserve to be imprisoned, they're lazy, or they're doing drugs or something like that. But it's actually a systemic structural racism problem that's getting folks into trouble who wouldn't even encounter the criminal justice system otherwise. Hart, do you have any excerpts of the text that you want to kick this conversation off with?
Absolutely. And I saw this as a meme, and decide for yourself if it's true, but I heard it said that racism is so American that when you criticize racism, people think you're criticizing America. You know?
I love it. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, racism is so deeply embedded.
Yes, I think that's what the white supremacists and the Proud Boys are saying, right? Like, how dare you criticize this racist country we love?
Right. I've been criticized of being anti-American. Imagine that. So I like saying, if I were in Germany in 1930s and 40s, if I criticized Hitler, if I hated Hitler, do I hate Germany?
Right. There's good and bad in this nation, and I think it's incumbent upon all Americans in a democracy to constantly be criticizing, right?
Right. Jefferson said that dissent is the highest form of patriotism.
Dissent is the highest form of patriotism. I love it. Yeah. And we're seeing that dissent in the streets right now. And it comes in all forms and degrees of radicalism, right? Some people just want justice for, say, Breonna Taylor. So, lock up her killers. That's one small thing. But if we do that, it's not going to really, that's going to be pruning at the problem of racism when we need to pull it out by its roots. And so more radical folks are going to say, get rid of policing altogether, defund policing. Other people somewhere in the middle will say, well, we can still have some police, but they're way overfunded, and we should be using that money to fund social support systems, right? So,
Right. So, we have militarized police, and when you're equipped like an army, you're going to go out there and treat your imagined adversary as, you're going to think it's a war. If you're all geared up for war, then you're going to go out there and you're going to make war on people.
That's right. That's right. You kind of get the America you build, right?
So you asked me about do I have quotes from the book? Let me start off with a couple of things that are kind of an introduction to the book, or at least, talk up this book. So Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is the secular Bible. This is according to Cornell West, who we've talked about on this show. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is the secular Bible for a new social movement in the early 21st century America. Now, this is Michelle Alexander writing in her introduction. She says, this book, which some predicted would never get an audience, wound up spending 246 weeks on the new, how many years is that? Almost 5 years.
Wow.
246 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and has been widely used by faith groups, activists, educators, and people directly impacted by mass incarceration inside and outside prisons, because prison doesn't just affect those who are incarcerated, it affects the families and communities of those who are incarcerated. It says, over the past 10 years, I've received thousands of letters and tens of thousands of emails from people in all walks of life who have written to share how the book changed them, or how they have used it to support consciousness raising or activism in countless ways. Everything, as of 10 years after the book, she says, everything has changed and yet nothing has. So she said that rather than revise this book, she did write a new introduction to it. But instead of giving an updated version of this book, there's so much to say about what has changed and what is the same that it would take a whole other book. So she decided to keep it as it is. She changed a little bit of the terminology, like, I forget exactly some of the terminology she changed to show respect and sensitivity to people who are being categorized by this or that term. But the book was published in 2010. President Obama had just been elected recently, and many people, almost everybody, wanted to think, the mainstream of America wanted to think that we're in a post-racial era. We have a president who's African American. Surely we can say that we've achieved the colorblindness. So this book did not start off strong. It landed like a lead balloon, so to speak, at first. And it wasn't until Obama had been in office 2 or 3 or 4 years that people were saying, okay, maybe nothing significant has changed with respect to mass incarceration, with respect to people of color and how they are treated in the justice system.
Yeah, yeah. And a nice thing that we've seen since the publication of the book is a lot of faith-based communities have taken on this issue as well and made it part of their sermons and organizing and fighting for living the true way, whatever the faith community may be. I'm looking at, you can learn more about the book at newjimcrow.com. from. And I'm looking there at just some of the, study and organizing guides that have been produced as a result of the book. And you can see there's specifically a faith-based study guide for the new Jim Crow to help facilitate study groups and consciousness raising amongst Black faith communities, obviously. But the Unitarian Universalist Association selected it but way back in 2012 as their common read and produced a study guide. So, I mean, people are making this part of their modern missionary work, whatever you want to call it, right? Like thinking about how we live in a way that reflects our values, and starting to treat all people as human and equal. And that means rooting out these structural forms of racism, which go back even to the days of Obama, right? Like nobody really truly thinks that Obama was ever going to come in and solve everything. But I think there was a sense, I remember that time, 2008, 2009, that the fact that we'd finally elected a Black president really meant something about how far our nation had come from the days of slavery, and when racism was so in your face that it was a part of everyday life and economy. And I think what we've seen in the time since then is that, oh, wait, there was a lot more that we needed to do than simply elect a Black president. And it's ingrained at every level of the criminal justice system, and beyond. It's so frustrating to me that even once a felon who's more likely to be targeted because of their color of their skin anyway, more likely to be, stopped and frisked or have their car pulled over, then once that happens, they're more likely to get arrested, right? Then once they're in prison, they're less likely to be able to get out on bail. They're more likely to be stuck there, and they're more likely to be convicted, more likely to have longer sentences, less likely to get out early, early release.
This is because of driving while Black, or this is because of possession of marijuana, a substance that's safer than tobacco or alcohol. It's sometimes because of dealing minor amounts of drugs. And it's, Chris Hedges says that 96% of people who end up in prison never had a trial. So how can you have a trial if you don't have, how can you have a fair trial guaranteed by the Constitution if you don't have a trial? And there are all kinds of ways to manipulate people into pleading guilty, because the people who say, no, I'm innocent, I'm going to go to trial, they end up with, double or triple the sentence that they would have if they had just pled guilty.
Yeah, it's like they're tricking you into prison, and that's why they call it the school to prison pipeline, putting police officers in schools where there's crime, right, which is a code word for Black and brown communities, right? So we got to police them more, those kids. We know they don't do well on tests, so therefore they must be troublemakers, when it's actually we're underfunding their schools to begin with because of racism in how we budget, right? But
Right.
we're willing to spend money on cops for those schools, or metal detectors at the doors, or what all kinds of security measures that you wouldn't get out in a white school. But we're not willing to spend the money on microscopes and books and teachers and arts supplies and musical instruments and everything that makes schools enriching for kids and makes them want to pay attention, want to do well, want to stay engaged.
And cops are in charge of situations for which they're not trained. Like police officers have to deal with mental illness. I was at a protest here in the Highlands once, not too long ago. It was around about the time that Iran, or there's talk about war with Iran, and I was. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at Heine Brothers on the corner of Bardstown Road and Douglas Loop, and then from across the street, I heard this shouting and yelling, and this police officer was yelling at the top of his lungs.
Wow.
At a homeless veteran.
Wow.
Who had either a shopping cart or just minimal, stuff to carry. And I ended up talking to the veteran for quite a while in Heine Brothers, and he was, he was not quite all there. He had some mental illness issues, but he was not dangerous in any way. And I felt like, I ended up crossing the street to where this cop was just yelling at the top of his lungs at a homeless veteran. And I felt like saying, what is going on in your life that you feel that this is the best way to deal with this situation? Shouting at the top of your lungs at somebody who is not harming anybody. And obviously, if you're that veteran, for one thing, needed a home. And another thing, needed a social worker. And I think it's been shown that the cheapest way to that it's a lot cheaper to provide homes than it is to deal with the effects of homelessness. So we're putting all this money into policing, but not, when that money could be so easily redirected into things that actually solve the problems the police have to deal with, or perceived problems police have to deal with.
No, I think that's a really good point, Hart. Have you heard about this program in Eugene, Oregon that's been operating for a while called Cahoots?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh. This is a really interesting alternative form of policing. So Cahoots stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets.
That's great.
It's a fourth arm of the emergency.
You had me at Cuh.
Yeah, exactly. So usually you have when you call 911, they're going to route your call to either the fire department, the EMS, if you got a medical issue, or the police. But there's all kinds of other reasons people call 911. You were just talking about the mental health issue. So in Eugene, Oregon, integrated into the 911 system is Cahoots. And if the call is clearly about an issue like that, where what they need is someone who knows about mental health, if they need a social worker, there's someone who you could call, and they will route from the 911 call a Cahoots social worker to come out to see the scene. Now they're integrated into the emergency network. So if they get there and there's weapons or fire, or someone really does have a medical need, then they can get in touch with those other branches. So I found a 4-minute piece from NPR. You want to?
Yeah, please.
Why don't I give it a little play and we can learn more about Cahoots?
Okay. Great.
Here we go.
You call 911, you generally get the police. It's a one-size-fits-all solution to a broad spectrum of problems, from homelessness to mental illness to addiction. Protesters are urging cities to redirect some of their police budget to groups that specialize in treating those kinds of problems. Now, we're going to look at one model that's been around for more than 30 years. In Eugene, Oregon, a program called Cahoots is a collaboration between local police and a community service called the White Bird Clinic. Ben Brubaker is the clinic coordinator, and Ebony Morgan is a crisis worker. Thank you both for joining us.
We're glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So Ben, if I'm in Eugene and I call 911, when does that call get routed to your team instead of to the police?
The calls that come into the police on emergency number and or through the 911 system, if they have a strong behavioral health component, if they are calls that do not seem to require law enforcement because they don't involve a legal issue or some kind of extreme threat of violence or risk to the person, the individual, or others, then they will route those to our team comprised of a medic and a crisis worker that can go out and respond to the call, assess the situation, assist the individual if possible, and then help get that individual to a higher level of care or necessary service if that's what's really needed.
And you get about 20% of the calls to 911, is that right?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit higher than that. We respond a lot of days, kind of back-to-back calls.
So, Ebony, when you show up on the scene, are you carrying any of the paraphernalia that a police officer would have? Do you have a uniform, handcuffs, a weapon?
Did you show up in an MRAP?
Are a lot more casual in appearance.
Okay.
The tools that I carry are my training. I carry my de-escalation training, my crisis training, and a knowledge of our local resources and how to appropriately apply them. I don't have any weapons, and I've never found that I needed them.
How often do you have to escalate? I mean, how often is your training just not enough to handle the problem?
So last year, out of a total of about 24,000 calls, 150 times we called for police backup for some reason. So not very often.
Can you give us an example of when you do need to call on the police?
if we believe that someone is in danger, especially, or is an immediate threat to others, for an example, if somebody is insisting on walking into traffic, I can't ethically just allow them to get hit by a car, but I also cannot restrain them. That is not my job. So that might be an instance where I need to call.
Ben, give us some numbers. How much does the program cost, and what measures do you have of its success?
Well, I would say that right now the program costs, with all of the combined programs, both in Eugene and Springfield, around $2.1 million a year.
To put that in perspective, the Eugene Police Department's annual budget is about $70 million and Springfield's is about $20 million.
We estimate that we save over $15 million a year in cost savings, both through our ER diversion, through picking up calls that would otherwise have to be handled by law enforcement or EMS, it would be a more expensive response, and through jail diversion.
Ebony, has your work in this program changed your view of police and law enforcement?
I came into this work passionate about being part of an alternative to police response because my father died during a police encounter. So it matters to me very much.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I'm not alone in that. So I'm really passionate about this. I think policing may have a place within this system, but I also think that it's overutilized as an immediate response because it just comes with a risk. And it's a risk that crisis response teams that are unarmed don't come with. In 30 years, we've never had a serious injury or a death that our team was responsible for. And I think that's important to note. I also recognize that my experiences are not isolated. And so I try to acknowledge where I believe there is room for improvement. And I think that models like this can help people have support in their community and feel safer within their community.
Ebony Morgan and Ben Brubaker of the Cahoots program in Eugene, Oregon, thank you both for talking with us.
Thank you.
And you're still listening to Forward Radio, Community Radio. That was a little clip from our friends at NPR. Many thanks to them for that great interview about Cahoots. I mean, this is your first year hearing about it, Hart. What's your reaction?
Man, they really, I was predisposed to believe that this is a good idea. And for one thing, we show up without weapons. That's one thing. And another thing, in 30 years, there has never been a serious injury. We save the police department $15 million a year, we estimate. 150 out, I didn't get the denominator of that, but 150 out of something like 1,200.
Yeah, I didn't either, but a lot of calls, right?
Yeah, right. So something called ER diversion, where instead of just picking somebody up in a EMS and taking them to the ER, well, maybe you don't need to go to the ER. If you have a social worker who she shows up with what? No weapons. She shows up with her de-escalation techniques and with a knowledge of community resources that can help that person.
Imagine if those were the tools in that emergency vehicle that appeared when people called 911.
Sometimes I think, I'm sure cops get some training in de-escalation, but how much training do they get in de-escalation versus the amount of time they spend shooting at a pretend guy, know?
Yep.
Center mass, dead center, learn how to shoot the center of learn how to shoot somebody in the heart, take them down. How much do they learn that aggressive problem solving techniques versus, the alternative, de-escalation?
A lot of cops probably have come from a military background or either directly or their family. So they're exposed to that training, which is all about dehumanizing, right? You can't.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Run a military without training people to not see the enemy as a non-human, right? So yeah,
That's an integral part of their training, dehumanization.
Yeah, it's built into the DNA of the operation, and that's why I support this idea of getting rid of police or radically defunding police. But we do need emergency responders.
Right.
And so I think that the idea of Cahoots is just brilliant. Like, let's be serious about hiring some social workers to be emergency responders to handle these many types of issues that could be, family, domestic concerns, noise concerns. Like there's so many reasons you don't need a law enforcement officer with a weapon to show up for every call. We have not built into our cities or our emergency response systems any decent alternative. And that's all part of the new Jim Crow, which is what we're talking about today here on Truth to Power with me, Justin Mogg, and Hart Hagan here on Forward Radio. We gather every week at this time for a community conversation about different hot topics, and given the protests on the streets and the injustice that still stands for Breonna Taylor and so many other people of color who've been victimized by the criminal justice system. I mean, you can extend this to immigrants, right? And the whole, the ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, which is now no longer just on, guarding our borders, but in cities, knocking down doors in the middle of the night.
Let's talk about a specific example. There's chapter 3, I believe, is called The Color of Justice. And she starts off with 2 stories that stem from the very same fact situation, where it was somewhere in Texas, and like 15% of the town was incarcerated or was arrested because of something that ended up not being very credible. But anyway, here's quoting from the book. It says, "Imagine you are Irma Faye Stewart, a 30-year-old single African-American mother of 2 who was arrested as part of a drug sweep in Hearne, Texas. All but one of the people arrested were African-American. You are innocent. After a week in jail, you have no one to care for your 2 small children and are eager to get home. Your court-appointed attorney urges you to plead guilty to a drug distribution charge, saying the prosecutor has offered probation. You refuse, steadfastly proclaiming your innocence. Finally, after almost a month in jail, you decide to plead guilty so you can return home to your children.
Wow.
Unwilling to risk a trial and years of imprisonment, you are sentenced to 10 years probation and ordered to pay $1,000 in fines, as well as court and So keep in mind, this person is innocent. She has spent time in jail. She's ordered to pay $1,000 in fines, as well as court and probation costs. You are now branded a drug felon. You are no longer eligible for food stamps. You may be discriminated against in employment. You cannot vote for at least 12 years, and you are about to be evicted from public housing. Once homeless, your children will be taken from you and put in foster care. A judge eventually dismisses all cases against the defendants who did not plead guilty. At trial, the judge finds that the entire sweep was based on the testimony of a single informant who lied to the prosecution. You, however, are still branded a drug felon, homeless and desperate to regain custody of your children."
Yeah, and when they make you pay a fine and you're already poor, I mean, or
It's a racket.
It's just ridiculous. Of course,
That's what Shamika Parish, cash bail is what Shamika Parish Wright is fighting, because you get picked up for nothing at all. You get put in jail. When you're in jail, you lose your job. If you can't afford you stay in jail. If you can't afford bail, you get out. You have a criminal record, even though you did little or nothing.
It's an endless cycle, and it's clearly a war on the poor. And so it's illegal to be poor in America. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we just made sure people didn't fall into poverty in the first place by universal basic income, Medicare for all, right? Like free public education, all the things that we know are essential for keeping people out of poverty. We're not willing to do. But we're certainly willing to lock people up and build more prisons. And I was reflecting on the vast expansion of the prison population, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it feels like the only reason this could possibly be the state in America is that we make it profitable to run prisons. We've privatized this industry. This is not true in other countries, right? Like, how can it possibly be that you can make money off of keeping people in cages? Like, it's bad enough you can make money causing climate change, right? Extracting fossil fuels. We certainly make that profitable. But now you can make money off of putting people in cages. If taxpayers had to pay to lock these people up, I don't think we'd be quite as eager to raise our taxes in order to just put everybody we don't like in jail.
Well, I think we do pay for the prisons, you know.
I suppose, yeah, I suppose we do, and then we make people rich. So it's another way of, funneling money upward.
Right, and plus, it's not only like Corrections Corporation of America is one of the big private prison companies. So you have not only capital interests like that, but you have unions of prison guards lobbying for tough sentences. You know, economically, they're on the wrong side. Anyway,
Right.
So,
We build these prisons in places where people are desperate for jobs.
and they're desperate for jobs, partly because of NAFTA. Their jobs have been shipped overseas through no fault of their own. You know, NAFTA is bad for our workers. It's bad for workers in other countries. And if you want to exploit, it helps for people to be sick, tired, broke, desperate, economically compromised. So and then like Indiana, for example, parts of rural Indiana, the General Motors is not there anymore. The General Motors plant went away, but the prison moved in, and that's where people get jobs as prison guards who might otherwise be working for a manufacturer. And also Caterpillar is in Indiana. So Caterpillar is always threatening to ship jobs overseas, and sometimes they make good on that. In fact, one of the reasons they have plants overseas, one of the reasons car companies and manufacturers have plants overseas is the threat of being able to just all of a sudden shift operations to somewhere else. To depress wages, make people negotiate to give up benefits, lower wages, et cetera.
No doubt. So, I mean, we've tied this whole issue of mass incarceration to somehow being a job creator, and it's just great. It's the
let me go into some of the stats, because there's this impression that more people of color are in prison because more people of color commit crimes. But let's deal with this. Michelle Alexander writes, although the majority of drug users and dealers nationwide are white, 3/4 of all people imprisoned for drug offenses have been Black or Latino. There are significant differences in the surveys to be found. They frequently suggest that whites, particularly white youth, are more likely to engage in illegal drug dealing than people of color. So white youth are more likely to deal with drugs and drug dealing than people of color. One study published in 2000 by the National Institute on Drug Abuse reported that white students use cocaine at 7 times the rate of Black students. This is students, so it's not the general population, but if you just look at students, white students use cocaine at 7 times the rate of Black students, use crack cocaine at 8 times the rate of Black students. Who would have thought? The National Household Survey on Drug Abuse reported in 2000 that white youth aged 12 to 17 are more than 1/3 more likely to have sold illegal drugs than African American youth, and yet overwhelmingly the prison populations are African American and Latino.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at those stats, it's just, and that's the fundamental basis. If you read the new Jim Crow, you'll see all these stats. It's just overwhelmingly obvious what's going on here, even if it's not written down somewhere that we are going to go out and imprison all the people of color.
And yet, if it bleeds, it leads. If you wanted to tune into the news, and you'll see something. You'll see sirens outside. You'll see flashing lights, EMS, caution tapes, and in a minority neighborhood.
Yeah,
That's what gets plastered on the news.
Or we stoke fear and we say, oh, the black people are protesting for Black Lives Matter, or whoever they are. They must be violent people coming to riot and loot. And so we better shut down our whole city, board up the businesses, put extra cops on overtime. I mean, it's just insane what the response to a vast majority of peaceful protesters who just simply want justice from this highly unjust system, who are simply calling out, doing the American thing of protesting and using their First Amendment rights to shine a light on the injustice that has been baked into our system. And the response is just more of the same, even more policing, even more of these racist assumptions about the people who are demanding justice. It's you don't have to look far to see this. It's right here in Louisville for sure. And then
on Facebook, I have this Facebook friend who, this is a person I never was her a close friend, but we met once, so I know who this person is. And this is an upper middle class white woman who is fairly well educated, and she's posting these pro-Trump messages, and she's usually posting what other people are writing. But I mean, she posts stuff like, Trump supporters aren't the people that are burning our country down, Like, how does she get the idea that somebody's burning our country down? I mean, who are these people that are burning our country down? Another post said, I've never seen a country so determined to get rid of a president instead of arresting drug dealers. And so, okay, what drug dealers are we talking about? Are we talking about these nonviolent offenders who get put in prison without a trial? Or are we talking about the banks that launder the money that the drug cartels? Let's talk about the chemical companies whose product is necessary for processing cocaine, and we know they're doing it. We can even trace the chemicals back to the company. We know that these chemical companies are involved in dealing drugs. So what drug dealers are you talking about? Well, let's talk about the CIA, who lets drugs go, caused the crack epidemic in Los Angeles, starting in Los Angeles and then other places. No doubt the CIA and DEA are turning their heads the other way while drugs are flown into, Texas, Miami, what have you. What drug dealers are you talking about?
Iran-Contra affair. I think.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Republican administration.
Right. Of course, Reagan had the war on drugs, so he must be against drugs,
I was going to ask you about that. You've studied history a little more than I have. When did our America's war on drugs begin? Was it in the Nixon era?
Yeah, Nixon had declared war on drugs, and then Reagan redeclared the war on drugs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, it's always been tied to racism. It's always been tied as a way to, those people who want civil rights. We've got to figure out a way to keep them down, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So this is a long part of American history, and I'm sure it's going to take us a long time to claw our way out of it. And there's a lot that we have to dismantle. I don't know. Do you ever see the smartest place to start with all of this, Hart? Can you see a way forward, or do we have to fix it all at once? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I can only see one angle. I only have my limited perspective, and, I would love to hear what Shamika Parrish Wright and Attica Scott have to say about this, and any number of people. But to me, I was conservative for most of my life, and then I was moderate for a few years. But then only within about the last 2.5 years have I come around to a more progressive perspective, if you will. And to me, all I had to do, pretty much, I had to be shown the facts. And also, I kind of came at it from an environmentalist perspective. So I learned how urgent it is for us to deal with the extinction crisis. And then I learned how urgent it is for us to deal with the climate crisis. And these are all things that are caused by just out of control capital. You know, let capital make all the decisions. It's like a free market, free for all. Whatever makes money is what makes the decision. So capital is making all the decisions for our government. So we know that there's money in politics. We know that, you know, our politics is drenched with money. We have the best politicians money can buy. And we know that public policy and public opinion are two different things. Public opinion wants Medicare for all. Public policy doesn't, such as it is. Public opinion wants war to be a last resort. Public policy is a different thing. So to me, it's about what we're doing now. This is why I do this. But what we're doing now is we're sharing what we know with people. But because, you know, we talked about this being a non-commercial station. This station is not bought out by commercial interests. If it were, we wouldn't be able to say all this, because at some level, Corrections Corporation of America would be, you know, paying our bills or scratching the back of whoever is paying our bills. So to me, I mean, it's glib and cliche to say the key is education, but I really think that if enough people knew the truth, then it would be a different world. And public policy would be different.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you tune into the mainstream media right now, or if you're getting your news from even social media now, what are you going to see? It's just a torrent of political ads, which just feeds this whole money is power narrative, when in truth, it's a democracy and it's one person, one vote, and corporations don't get to vote. And we really get to decide who we put in power. But if we're tuning in to that corporate media, then guess what we're going to get? We're going to get more corporate supported advertising, and whoever the corporations want in power is the messaging we're going to see. And that's why things like community radio are so vital to pay attention to and to participate in and to help sustain. Without your contributions at forwardradio.org, like Hart said, we could not be having this conversation with you and the community today, and you wouldn't hear the kinds of perspectives that you get here on community radio otherwise. So
let's slam the corporate media again for just another minute. So you know, Matt Taibbi is a really good reporter for Rolling Stone. It just does great reporting. He's I really trust him and like him. He's one of my top 10 reporters that I really like. So he wrote a book called Hate Inc. In other words, Hate Incorporated. So he talks about how back when cable TV became a big thing. Well, going back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, if you have ABC, CBS, NBC, you have Walter Cronkite speaking to America, then Walter Cronkite is designed to appeal to the broadest possible swath of people. So it had its faults and it was deeply flawed, but at least you were speaking to one group of people in the middle. Then cable came along, and the Fox News people decided to capture the neglected conservative audience for their own. And that conservative audience of Fox News became a tribe for what we call conservative. And then not too long after that, MSNBC came along, and it became the tribe of people who identify as Democrats. So you have, and Matt Taibbi called his book Hate Inc., Hate Incorporated, because on the cover, he has Sean Hannity of Fox News and Rachel Maddow of MSNBC, kind of opposite sides of the same coin. And so what he's saying is, right or wrong, what he's saying is that these corporations are making money off of hate. Fox News has its type of hate, and you know, it's hard to imagine our cuddly liberals being hateful, but there's a tribe that is condescending. And the conservatives hate being taught manners anyway, I'm getting too far into the weeds there, but you have tribalism for profit.
Yeah. You're listening
How did I get started on that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. You're listening to Truth to Power here on your community radio station, Forward Radio, WFMP LP Louisville at 106.5 FM and forwardradio.org. My name is Justin Mogg. Hart Hagan and I are having a conversation about the new Jim Crow today, and we got down an interesting road about community-controlled media, and this is an important week for that. I want to highlight a couple of things about October 9th, Hart. First of all, October 9th, this Friday, is the start of the Grassroots Radio Conference. It's an annual conference of folks who are interested in this kind of radio that you're listening to, and this year it's gone virtual, and so it's a lot easier to participate, but it's actually being hosted by our local sister station, Art FM WXOX, and I'd encourage people to check it out. You can learn more at virtualgrc.org, Virtual Grassroots Radio Conference, virtualgrc.org, and you can register for just one of the 3 days or all three of them. If you register by October 6th, you get an early bird registration discount. We're going to be talking about issues such as the pandemic, how to broadcast safely and responsibly, the protests, how to amplify justice and equality for all, the president, how to energize the electorate through the FM dial, and hyper-local news reporting during things like wildfires and other disasters striking our nation. And that's Friday through Sunday this week, October 9th to 11th, 11 a.m. To 6:15 p.m., even with some evening events. And you can learn more at virtualgrc.org. But what's the other thing about October 9th, Hart? It's the last day to request a mail-in ballot in Kentucky. So we want you to vote, and we want you to vote early. You can go to online to govoteky.com. No matter where you are in Kentucky, you'll find links there to request your mail-in ballot. The deadline, again, is this coming Friday, October 9th, at 11:59 p.m. And of course, they're going to be doing early voting as well, open to anyone. You don't need a special excuse. You don't need to register in advance. And that starts on October 13th. And just this last week, they announced where that will be happening here in Jefferson County. There's actually 4 different places you can go to vote early and on Election Day.
Early and often.
Yeah. And we want you to vote once, but we want your vote to count. Make sure you get in and vote. And there's 4 different places you can vote. You can vote at the Expo Center, at the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage at 17th and Muhammad Ali, downtown at the KFC Yum Center in the foyer at Main and 2nd, and out east at the Louisville Marriott East. And that's Monday through Saturday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And then Election Day on November 3rd, all 4 of those locations will be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And God bless them, they even have free parking at all 4 of those locations. Must be Louisville.
Yeah.
So yes, please make sure to vote, folks, and be an informed voter. I just downloaded my sample ballot, and there were all kinds of things on there I was not expecting, because the only thing anyone's talking about is maybe the Mitch McConnell race and probably the presidential race. But hey, there are other things on your ballot, the state house races, soil and water conservation district.
Right.
But there are also 2 constitutional amendments on there, which I had no idea until I heard our brand new program on Forward Radio. Just last night, I heard the program We and You talking about the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot. And so you're not going to learn about these things in mainstream media. You got to have community media to learn about these and get these kinds of perspectives and to truly be an informed voter. So do your research and check it out. And that's all part of dismantling the new Jim Crow is having more democratic participation. And can I get to an issue that I was starting down this road when I started talking about at the beginning, when I started talking about how there's this, Black folks are more likely to end up in the criminal justice system because of all these steps along the way. But even once they get out of prison, we deny them the right to vote.
Right.
This is insane to me. I don't know where these laws came from in the first place. I mean, it's obvious they're racist laws. Now that you look, you can look at it with 2020 hindsight of history and see how statistically it turns out that this is a way to disenfranchise majority people of color, or just poor people and people who end up in the criminal justice system. What they call it the rehabilitation system, right? It's the Department of Corrections. We're supposed to be rehabilitating and correcting these people.
Right.
If we actually believed that in the least, we would not prevent them from voting once they serve their time.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the criminal element is going to take over if you let them vote, you know?
They might vote for another criminal.
Yeah, right.
That never happens.
Right, yeah. So I've heard that there's so many people that are not allowed to vote because of a criminal record that is enough to change the outcomes of many of our elections. So there's a certain logic in not letting people vote.
And we can see how scared the Republicans in Florida are right now. Like you said earlier, like if you look at what people actually demand, it's not the Republican agenda. So it was on the ballot in Florida. Do we want to restore voting rights for former felons? And overwhelmingly, that passed when you put the public vote, right? Yes, people want former felons to be able to vote. And now the Republicans are doing everything they can through lawsuits with these, now that the federal courts have been packed by McConnell with conservatives. Every lawyer is on that team is doing whatever tricks they can to try and make sure that those folks aren't actually able to vote for one reason or another. It's just disgusting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are we going to do about that?
Oh man. That's what I'm saying. Like, where do we begin? Well, we got 10 more minutes to talk about the new Jim Crow, Hart. Is there anything else that was burning on your radar you wanted to touch on?
Oh, there's a lot. I could go another hour, but I'm not sure if you're up for that. So, okay, here's another quote. Now, this is crime as a class issue. This is, do the real criminals actually go to jail? If I've heard it said that there's more crime in the suites than in the streets. So this speaks to that. She says, while some banks were eventually, this is like, okay, after 2008, this is writing in her new introduction to the book, but it says, while some banks were eventually prosecuted and agreed to pay fines that were a small fraction of their profits, the individuals who committed these crimes, in other words, the crimes that we know that crimes led to the 2008 downturn, that bank fraud was a part of that criminal actions led to that downturn. And statistically, you can correlate between an economic downturn and people dying. So this is not just, we're going to pull in our oars and we're going to be a little bit poorer for a while. But she says,
just to real quickly point out, it's a classic blame the victim thing with the 2008 crisis too, because people will say, oh, that was caused by all these poor people who are going out and getting mortgages that they really shouldn't have, right? Like it's their fault that criminal mortgage-backed securities were going on. Come on.
If you want to know what happened, watch The Big Short.
Oh, that's
it's absolutely, yeah. So you saw it. It's absolutely one of my favorite, very entertaining. And it's like, remember those guys that were had great tans and they were just laughing at the fact that they had people that couldn't read English sign these mortgage forms, So speaking to that, it says, while some banks were eventually prosecuted and agreed to pay fines that were a small fraction of their profits, the individuals who committed these crimes were typically spared. Despite engaging in forms of criminality that destroyed the lives and wealth of millions, they were not rounded up, dragged away in handcuffs, placed in cages, and then stripped of their basic civil and human rights or shipped to another country. Their mugshots never appeared on the evening news, and they never had to wave goodbye to their children in a courtroom, unable to give them a final embrace. This is crime as a class issue. Poor people go to jail for crimes. Poor people go to jail even though they never committed crimes. Rich people who who commit crimes typically don't go to jail except in very rare cases.
When they hire the wrong lawyer.
Yeah, that's it. And that's their mistake, you know. Serves you right if you didn't hire the right lawyer, you know.
No, that's so true. Yeah, this is.
Or we're not even talking about war crimes, you know. Why is George W. Bush free? He's a war criminal. There's this video. It's like a 7 minute video where Noam Chomsky it names every president from Truman up to whoever the president was at the time. It might have been the Obama year. I mean, not hard. Not hard to. I personally, you don't have to be Noam Chomsky. I personally could name the war crimes for every president since 1945. They all commit war crimes. And they give the orders. You know, they give the Bush lied us into the Iraq War. Colin Powell, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and many, many more lied us into the Iraq War.
Yeah, and they never seem to end up in jail. Even after they get out of the presidency, but certainly while they're president, we can't possibly charge them with any crimes.
That would be a bad precedent, because if you're Obama and you charge George W. Bush with crimes, then Trump gets in office, he charges Obama with crimes. So you better mind your manners. You better, toe the line on the honorable tradition of not charging war criminals with war crimes.
Oh my. Mm. Yes.
We're here to cheer you up.
That's what we do here on Truth to Power. It's all bubbles and rainbows here.
Yeah.
So it's the 10th anniversary of the new Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander is the author. We never mentioned her. She's a highly acclaimed civil rights lawyer, advocate, legal scholar, and of course, author. Over the years, she's taught at a number of universities, Stanford Law School being one of them. And she won a Soros Justice Fellowship in 2005 that supported the writing of the new Jim Crow. And prior to joining academia, she was engaged in civil rights litigation in both private and nonprofit sector, ultimately serving as the director of the Racial Justice Project for the ACLU of Northern California. So let
me give you another quote.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we saw earlier how, white people are at least as likely to commit drug crimes as black people. But in light of that fact, listen to this. Human Rights Watch reported in 2000 that in 7 states, African Americans constitute 80 to 90% of all those sent to prison on drug charges. In at least 15 states, blacks are admitted to prison on drug charges at a rate from 20 to 57 times greater than that of white men. And this might seem too good to be true, but she's got footnotes. Every one of these has a footnote to it. So read New Jim Crow, and it's got footnotes. Continuing to read, in fact, nationwide, the rate of incarceration for African Americans convicted of drug offenses dwarfs the rate of whites nationwide.
That's what we're talking about here on Truth to Power, and we're all out of time, I'm afraid. It's been a pleasure again diving into this text and thinking about what it means for a way forward today. It's been a pleasure hosting this. My name is Justin Mogg. I'm host of Sustainability Now, and I encourage you to tune into that show. I'm doing a series of interviews with returned Peace Corps volunteers who've served all over the world in all kinds of different capacities. What about you, Hart? What's coming up on the Climate Report, and Let's Talk? Anything special?
Well, we're going to be talking again soon about the FBI versus Martin Luther King. We're going to be talking again on this show soon about the book Switch. We'll be talking to a woman named Kathleen Halal of Non-Toxic Communities. And tomorrow at 4 o'clock, never mind that. That's a bit too soon. But also, This Land is something we'll be talking about periodically. This Land, how cowboys Capitalism and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. It's a phenomenal book. I'm talking about that with Jake Bush.
Check it out every day on this station at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and we'll be back in your ears again in 1 week's time. Be well.
Good night. Thank you.